Today's episode of Path to Power is brought to you by Greenman, an Irish investment management firm with over 20 years of experience.
Greenman Open is a European long-term investment fund, or LTIF. It's focused on grocery-anchored retail real estate. These are the kinds of properties that some investors believe remain essential even in uncertain markets. People still need to buy food. That's what they say makes this sector more resilient and more stable over the long term.
Unlike many alternative investment funds that are only available to professionals, Greenman Open is open to a wide range of investors with lower minimum investments and a highly regulated structure.
Just remember, all investments carry risk. Values can go up or down, and past performance isn't a reliable guide to future returns. Greenman Open is a regulated LTIF, but you should always speak to a financial advisor before investing. Learn more on the website greenmanopen.com.
Hello and welcome to this, our latest edition of Path to Power. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Ivan Yates.
If you're watching this on YouTube, you will see that we're not in studio together, that I'm in a hotel room. I'm in the Rivoli Hotel in Cork. So this means slightly different to the way we normally present the programme, but we still have loads to talk about. And let's start, Ivan, by talking about the election of the new Pope, Pope Leo XIV, a man from Chicago, the first native English speaker in centuries to become the Pope. But it raises the question as well, I suppose, who's going to be the most powerful American in the world now? Because until Thursday evening, there was no doubt it was Donald Trump, the US president. Now we have American Pope, Prevost, Pope Leo XIV. I suppose Leo doesn't have the power of the nuclear weapons or the dollars or the trade and the rest of it, but he does have 1.4 billion followers, and maybe he even has God on his side. So who do you reckon is the most powerful American now?
Well, I reckon he's not an American at all. I mean, yes, of course, he was born in Chicago. He was an altar boy. But right from the point of his ordination in 1982, he has been a Peruvian priest through the Augustinian order, and has either been a bishop in northern Peru and subsequently working in Rome when he was made a cardinal with the dicastery or whatever it is. But when you listen to Irish people like Father Iggy O'Donovan, who call him Bob Prevost as opposed to Leo XIV, you see that he is actually a continuity candidate in terms of basically the affinity with the poor, his work as with the missions in Peru, a very humble man. I think he'd go for some of the pomp and ceremony that the previous Francis didn't go for. But Matt, please, I mean, popes have no power. I mean, they might be of help in the next world, but they actually have, beyond Vatican City, no power.
It's interesting that you say he's not really American. That'd be like saying that an Irishman who emigrates to America at the age of 20 is no longer Irish, that they become American. They remain Irish as well as adapting. So he has two citizenships. He is both American and he is Peruvian. I think what is very interesting about him is that he comes from an immigrant background, which will be important if he decides to speak out now as Pope on issues about immigration in the United States. And it was interesting to note that he had an active presence on social media prior to being elected Pope on Thursday, that he had taken issue very strongly with J.D. Vance, the American Vice President, in relation to immigration, and a ranking that J.D. Vance had given to how you looked after people, which sort of put the immigrants and strangers down at the bottom of the list. And the new Pope had taken issue with J.D. Vance and that. And he'd also taken issue with Trump using the Oval Office to push forward the illegal deportation of Americans to Central America. So it'll be very interesting to see if the new position softens his cough, if he decides that he can't take to social media? Or could it be that we're in a completely new 21st century dispensation where he might decide, well, if the likes of Trump and Vance are using social media to foment and agitate against immigrants, and if they're telling lies about things, that he too will decide to use this as a way of counteracting it. So it'll be interesting to see then how much influence he has. But I think it's also interesting, you describe him as a continuity candidate. So sometimes that can be interpreted in a couple of ways, that sort of a continuity candidate is sort of an interim one. I think at the age of 69, the expectation will be that this man will get many years in the papacy. But it is definitely a continuity from Pope Francis. And maybe we underestimated Pope Francis as a politician in that he packed the Curia. What he managed to do was he managed to rig the electorate. That the 2/3, I think, maybe that much of those who voted for the new Pope had been appointed by Pope Francis. And maybe that was been underestimated, particularly by conservative Catholic elements, mainly coming out of the United States, who were trying to imply that the Catholic Church was fed up of the woke theology of Pope Francis and wanted a return to conservatism. And instead, what we're going to get is an extension and perhaps, who knows, maybe an intensification of what Pope Francis wanted to do, particularly in relation to issues of social rights and climate change.
Yeah, I found yesterday's drama, because it was quick, within a couple of days getting your white smoke. I had a couple of observations when I saw he was 69. I'm 65. I'm wondering, will I ever see white smoke again? Because if this guy lasts 20 years, I think he'll outlive me. But I would say on the big issues dividing the church, ordination of women, recognizing gay marriage and admitting, full equality rights based on gender, I don't think there'll be much change. But I think his whole pitch will be that of widening the church's footprint in the global south, and all of the things that Francis imbued. I think he will continue. That's what I meant by continuity candidate. Of course, he'll have a different personality. In fact, I would say, because he speaks something like 6 languages, he'll be a brilliant communicator for the church.
So it'll be fascinating to see what happens. But yes, the real power lies with Donald Trump. It's a question of how he exercises it. So the other thing that happened on Thursday, which was of particular interest to us here in Ireland, was the trade deal that the United States announced with the United Kingdom. Making a big hullabaloo about it, the usual stage management of the whole thing. And this has been portrayed as something of a win for Britain, that it's the first country that has managed to do a new trade deal since the imposition of the tariffs. And this sort of puts it up, I suppose, to the European Union. Why haven't you been able to do a deal? And then raises questions for Ireland. And I'm sure there'll be many Brexiteers who will say that Britain was able to do the deal because it was independent of EU negotiations. Would you not be better off in Ireland having the opportunity to do that as well? But a couple of things did strike me in relation to what was announced. One is that essentially the British have accepted the permanent imposition of a 10% tariff on everything that goes into the United States. And that's significantly damaging to its exporters. Now, it may be that Europe isn't going to be able to get any better deal, or maybe on a higher tariff, but the point still remains is that Trump has imposed a 10% tariff. And then all of the talk, well, the motor vehicles are going to be 10%, whereas motor vehicles from the rest of the world are 25%. And that is very important to the UK car manufacturing industry, particularly your luxury cars like your Range Rovers and your Jaguars and whatever. But again, what price are they actually paying for that? Because it seems, although the details have not yet been formally released, that they are going to have to take things like the hormone-treated beef and the chlorinated chicken. So are they going to accept lower standards? And then we have to worry, I suppose, that if they do start taking those foodstuffs from the United States, assuming the Americans want to export them there because there's a shortage of supply of food in the United States as it is. But is that going to impact on our ability to export things such as beef and chicken to the United Kingdom. What did you make of it all?
Well, I, as with everything to do at the White House, you've got to try and look at the theatre, look at the reality show, and then the next day look at, well, what have they actually agreed? And it was very interesting watching BBC Early Morning News this morning. It had the American spin on it that US exports into Britain had gone from 5.3 to 1.8% across a range of tariffs, and imports from the UK had gone from, doubled effectively. So a couple of things, and I think this has to be seen in tandem with Micheál Martin, with Ursula von der Leyen yesterday, where the countermeasures that Europe are looking at, the detail of the 95 billion of trade. So I want to come to that in a moment. But basically, when you look at it, it's a good deal for Jaguar Land Rover because they had stopped exporting the cars, and they've got a deal, as you say, from 28% down to 10%, which makes those sales viable. The sweet point is the UK government nationalised steel, and that has gone to zero, some of the metal, steel and aluminium, which is a stroke. The rest of it, it seems to me, an agreement to do a deal rather than a deal itself. The detail is scant enough, but obviously Europe are looking at, we have a population of consumer market of 470 million, the UK is 69 million. We do have more heft and clout in our negotiations, but I do see worrying signs ahead for Europe and for Ireland because, first of all, bad news for Ryanair. If the countermeasures go through, there's 10 billion of US imported aircraft, which it will be subject to a tariff, maybe up to 20%. They've picked out other items, which include bourbon, which means there could be reprisals for the 800 million of exports of Irish beverage sector to the US. So put it like this, the fact that he's up for a deal is a direction of line of travel, which I think is positive. But, I mean, the prospects of an EU-US trade war have actually probably got a little worse.
I suspect that they actually have, and I think the Irish government is particularly sensitive to the idea of these 95 billion worth of tariffs that the EU on Thursday said it would impose. That this is including things that we thought were going to be left off the list. That there is a major problem that the European Union is finding when it's trying to negotiate with the United States is that it's finding that it's like negotiating with a blob of jelly, that there's seem to be no backbone to the US position, no real understanding of what it is they're actually looking for. It's as if Trump actually sees the tariffs as a way to stop trade rather than actually getting trade deals, that he wants to stop imports into the United States of America. And then the concern becomes, do we actually end up in a situation as well where services get included? If there's what is at the moment the skirmishes of a trade war, if it becomes a full-scale escalated trade war, do we have a situation where we have, for example, special levies put on all of the tech companies that are offering services to the European Union out of Ireland? So it is, I suppose it's inevitable that this was going to happen, particularly when it's so difficult to negotiate with somebody like Trump, who is not as skilled in it as he likes to portray himself. But I suppose then it's a question of whether Europe actually holds firm and whether the Americans think that you will have special pleading from Ireland about things that are important to us, like Irish whiskey, like the French are going to be saying you've got to protect champagne and all of these various things. It means this is going to take months and months and months to play out. But the other element that I thought, sorry, Gavin, come in.
Yeah,
there,
I just wanted to add one point of detail which would be of concern to me. On the cars deal, there's a quota restriction as well. The first 100,000 cars. You can imagine, and they're taking 15,000 tons of US beef. How would you implement that within the context of Europe? In other words, if Germany is selling BMWs and someone else in Europe is selling Skodas, how are you going to apply a quota within Europe? And obviously then we've got to look at the north-south implications. If it does transpire that the UK gets a sweetheart deal. Given that we have no land border, will it have impact here? So I put it like this. I think the devil is in the detail, and it's going to take years to thrash this out.
And then you get all sorts of unintended consequences as well. Apparently now the American defense industry is up in arms, no pun intended, about the fact that now with Europe being forced to increase its spending on armaments, Europe has decided, well, that's fine. We'll manufacture and buy them within Europe, and from elsewhere. We won't take them from America. So the Americans are suddenly discovering that their export sales are going to be damaged by the desire of Trump to force the Europeans to spend more money on defence, which is one of these unintended consequences that you get. But I thought it was also interesting in the context of something else I want to talk about that happened this week. And the really, really strong statements that came from the Irish government on Tuesday from both the Taoiseach Micheál Martin and Taoiseach Simon Harris in relation to Israel and Gaza. Because I think, as we've discussed on this show previously, there is a major issue with the American support for Israel is pretty complete. And it's not just a governmental support, it's something that comes out of corporate America as well. And in the boardrooms of America, where they're making decisions as to the allocation of capital, they're already holding fire on many things that they might have spent their money on because of the uncertainties. When those uncertainties are lifted, they might decide to put the money into America rather than into Ireland or Europe. But if they are going to go ahead, many of these companies still, despite all of that, to invest their money in Europe, are they going to, at some corporate levels, decide to put it into countries that they regard as more Israel-friendly than Ireland? So, in describing what Israel is doing in Gaza at present with the blocking of humanitarian aid and with these outrageous plans for the complete annexation of Gaza, the complete takeover of Gaza, Micheál Martin described them as war crimes. This is absolutely designed to drive the Israelis mad. And ethically, morally, absolutely the right description of what it is that the Israelis are doing and planning to do. And I think we all would take it that that is an apt description. But we're amongst the few countries who are actually saying that. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have said it. And Simon Harris doubled down and backed up Micheál Martin on this as well with other statements on Tuesday. But there could be economic consequences for us in Ireland for taking such a strong position on behalf of the Palestinian people. What did you make of it all?
Well, first of all, I think any impartial observer would have to say that the Israeli position has significantly shifted from an original situation of getting their hostages back after the 7th of October 23 or whenever it was, and the Hamas attack. It's now quite clear that there's a different objective, which is to simply occupy the territory of Gaza and its 2.3 million people. And basically, they're starving them out with a blockade. They've resumed full military takeover. So this isn't actually to get the hostages back. This is actually to turn it into a massive settler program and to colonize the Gaza Strip. So I can absolutely understand where people are coming from. But I was looking at a survey of MEPs, and the question was, is there any appetite to review the trade agreement between Israel and the EU, not to speak of sanctions? And the answer was absolutely no. The Christian Democratic group, the largest groups, have all set their face against that. The French and Germans have set their face against. So Ireland is bleating in the wind. In other words, the justifiable shift in the Israeli position resulting in a hardening of the Irish position, whereby the Occupied Territories Bill is back on the agenda, Simon Harris promising it'll be back in the Dáil in 3 weeks' time, that all of that is actually not going to make any difference. The other interesting thing I thought during the week is, as you know, and would you care, the Eurovision is on next week, and the people, good people in RT said we should boycott it. The reality, and Kevin Backers has come out and said we won't boycott. The reality is Russia were previously banned from the Eurovision contest over the Ukrainian situation. And I actually think the European Broadcasting Union have actually funked this. And all they had to do was to expel Israel. And in other words, as opposed to someone boycotting it, there is actually a way of dealing with a pariah state, and that is to expel them. And I think that is a very reasonable option.
I think you used the word justifiable there about Israel's actions. I think you meant unjustifiable in the context.
Yes.
So just to clarify that in case anybody comes along afterwards and tries to pick out that little bit and say that you said something that you actually didn't say. But the Eurovision thing is interesting because I think what it actually emphasizes is that we don't necessarily understand how the continental Europe feels about Israel and about the Jewish people. So we're there with Spain and Norway and Iceland and various other European countries this week coming out and condemning war crimes by Israel. And nobody else in Europe is actually willing to do so. I don't know whether that is still down to collective guilt in relation to the failure to protect the Jewish people during the Holocaust, for acquiescing in the murder of over 6 million people. But I suppose, we're at a more of a distance on an island on the periphery of Europe, can look at this with with better view and can see that while I don't know anybody. I know there probably are a few people who would try and explain and justify the evil terrorist attack by Hamas on October 7th. But it is possible to both condemn that and also condemn Israel's response as being utterly disproportionate and unjustified. And to be able to do that, as I think President Michael D. Higgins has pointed out, in the face of adverse comment from Israel, which likes to accuse Ireland of being anti-Semitic, that it is not anti-Semitic to actually condemn the actions of the Israeli government and the Israeli Defence Forces in what they are doing. I think there are a few idiots who go around singing, from the river to the sea, not understanding that it means the destruction and elimination of Israel. Maybe there are a small element within Irish society who would like the elimination of Israel, but I think the vast majority of Irish people would not look for that, but they don't want to see Israel either involved in the mass slaughter that it has engaged itself in. We better take a break and we shall come back and we're going to talk about lots of other things, including Ruth Coppinger and Joe Duffy and various other elements of the week in politics on Path to Power after this break.
This episode of Path to Power is brought to you by Greenman, an Irish investment management firm. Greenman Open focuses on investing in grocery-anchored retail real estate, designed to generate stable, long-term income. The fund is managed in Ireland. Learn more on the website greenmanopen.com.
Now, before making any investment, it's important to understand the risks. Investments could go up or down, and past performance is not a reliable guide to future results. Greenman Open is a regulated LTIF, but like all investments, it carries risks. You should always seek advice from a financial professional before investing. Welcome back to the second part of Path to Power. Just one last reference, Ivan, I suppose, to Donald Trump. Whoever would have thought that Ruth Coppinger would have turned into our version of Donald Trump? And the reason I say that is there was an incident this week involving Ruth Coppinger and People Before Profit colleague Paul Murphy, in which they were giving a press conference in Leinster House, and they refused to take a question from an individual from a website, Gript, and the other media people there, quite rightly, led by Louise Byrne in the Irish Mirror and Jack Horgan-Jones in the Irish Times, said, look, we're all here together. We're all members of the press council. We're doing our job. We're asking questions. And she refused. She didn't like the way that Gript has reported on things. She doesn't like the market that it's appealing to. But I would argue that she mightn't like it, but she has to suck it up, Ivan, because otherwise she's getting into the territory of being like Donald Trump saying any media that he doesn't like is fake news, and he denigrates it. And now he's moved to the situation whereby certain media organisations are being excluded, and only those that he approves of get to ask questions in the White House. So it's funny how what you might call the far right and the far left can actually meet at times in their attitudes towards certain things. And although it's for very different reasons, they're taking the same approach towards the media they don't like. What do you think?
Well, I'm surprised that you're taken aback by this insofar as who are the bedfellows of absolutely principled Trotskyites, and they are China and Russia. And they are the most authoritarian. They don't respect democracy at all. And I felt with Ruth Coppinger and Paul Murphy, actually the mask slipped, that they can be very authoritarian in some of their approaches. I thought that Louise Byrne and Jack Horgan-Jones actually behaved in a very exemplified way, because it would be easier to throw Ben Scallon under the bus than it would be to actually stand up and push back against it. And I thought it was a bit humiliating when the press sort of circled the wagons and said, no, we're ending this press conference. And so I'll agree with you on this point, that the far right and the far left actually don't respect alternative opinions. They can be very authoritarian, and one is as bad as the other.
Can I ask, though, during your time as a politician, and particularly as a minister, would there have been media that you would have refused to deal with?
No, there was the RTE, what was it, Section whatever?
Section 31.
Section 31 was the only experience, because I was a member of the cabinet. I think Michael D was Minister for Communications when that was lifted. So before that, yes, there was a ban on any Sinn Féin IRA spokespersons on the national broadcaster. But but you must remember that I operated in an era when there was no social media. The media has turned into social media and culture wars. And the media used to report news, analyse news, sometimes have an opinion, sometimes critique. But now the media has completely been transformed because it's such a competitive, unfinanced arena. People have to have their own media brand. So you see Fox and CNN, and you're going to probably see something like that, whereby the establishment papers will be seen as pro, centre-right or whatever, and you'll have other publications. But no, I would always respected everyone's point of view, and the emphasis was on accuracy and the truth rather than any political leanings.
Yeah, but you would have at times ducked questions. There must have been questions coming into your press office that you would have decided not to answer. And not just because you didn't necessarily have an answer to that particular question, but I'd imagine there must have been times that, say, in that time I would have been in the Irish Independent as business editor and then Sunday Tribune editor. And if I sent a question into the press office for Ivan Yates, you might have said, shag off, I'm not answering that guy. I don't like what he actually has had to write or had to say. And you would ignore us. There are ways of doing it. So the difference in this case is this was a press conference on the plinth that had been called. They were looking for attention and then decided they didn't like the attention that they were getting from a particular journalist.
No, throughout my media, political career, I was I tried to use the media to project my own image. I was quite ruthless about that in terms of I saw the media as a conduit for my own image, because I believed in politics the perception was as important as the reality. But you are right about this, that when I was minister, there were lots of things whereby there was quite self-evidently a culture within the civil service of secrecy. Oh, Minister, you can't tell them about this boat to Egypt whereby so many animals died. You can't possibly give them the full information about A, B and C. And it was a kind of prized possession of the civil service culture that they knew stuff. And, just take this week. So I was doing this infrastructure summit, and then the night before there was a speaker's dinner. And the conversation was quite different because the Chatham House rules applied to the dinner. And the fact of the matter is, there is a culture in the public sector, that they won't be out there rattling against the government or against the Department of Finance or public expenditure, because that's not the way they do business. So put it like this, I would say much more than any individual politician who is media, all politicians in my view are fairly media user friendly. The reality is within the civil service, there is a culture that you will not bite the hand that feeds you.
Of course, by the time Joe Duffy started on Liveline, it was 1998, and you were out of office as a minister. You continued as a politician for another few years. So, did you ever experience a sort of a, and I say this, a Joe Duffy pile-on, shall we say? And I say that not in any derogatory sense, but that there were lots of times during his 29-year tenure, 27-year tenure of Liveline, where he did set the agenda, where the giving of a voice to what are described as some incorrectly ordinary people, because we're all ordinary people, but people who are not in positions necessarily of power and authority, that by giving them a voice, he managed to set a political agenda. Were you ever monstered because of that?
Well, I have quite a lot to say about Joe Duffy. Joe Duffy first came on my radar because when my wife Deirdre was doing teacher training college, there was an element of it where she did lectures in Trinity College, and Joe was involved as the student officer there, and he could not have been more friendly to her. And subsequently on two occasions, one with my bankruptcy and the other time when I left full-time media, he sent me a lovely handwritten letter. So I just want to say a few words about Joe, because I think he's a major figure in Irish public life and has been for some time. He was sort of trained by Gay Byrne. He was quite populist and so on. So there's a number of issues. First of all, I think he's a complex character. He's done religious programs and all the rest of it. But he is, I think, privately a very sincere person. Takes, where I would criticise him is sometimes he took himself too seriously. Like, I'm a great believer, the content of what we talk about, I take seriously, but I actually don't take you or me seriously. And so therefore, I think that is an issue. But a lot of people have texted me to say that he would be an ideal presidential candidate in the context of the vacuum that now exists. So let's get a few weeks out of that possibility. Would one of the major parties who are casting around for candidates be interested in him? The second issue is who will take over Liveline. So the insider view is that Philip Boucher-Hayes or Katie Hannon will get the gig. But I want to put two candidates in the field. Now, this will be decided by Patricia Monaghan, formerly of Bauer and News Talk, my old boss. One is Anton Savage, who on a Saturday morning when I'm in the car, he always has someone on, questions for the doctor, questions for the electrician or whatever it is. I think he'd be well suited to that format and has a kind of agile mind. The other person is an aging presenter of a programme that's probably going to be replaced by music called The Last Word. And he, once Bauer get their music feet under the table there in Today FM. So I'm actually recommending you, Matt, as a possibility for it. Would you be up for it?
I don't think that would be me now, to be honest. But I actually would like to endorse what you say about Joe's generosity, because I have been the subject of that as well on a couple of occasions. He is a very generous individual. And I think you're right to say that we shouldn't underestimate the impact that he's had on public life. You used the word that he had a populist feel. He did. He had a good feel, I think, for what it was that people were either talking about or wanted to be talking about. And I think sometimes we might underestimate the impact that people like him do actually have on the political discourse and the political outcomes. And that means that his retirement is a significant occasion. I hadn't thought of the issue of him running for the presidency. It could be that the timing is entirely coincidental, that his contract was up at the end of June. You're sitting at the moment in the studios of the offices of Noel Kelly Management, and I know that Noel Kelly Management acts on behalf of Joe, but I certainly haven't spoken to anybody, Noel Kelly or anybody else, about Joe's situation or Joe's position in relation to whether he was going to get a new contract or whether he wanted one or anything like that, or whether he wants to be president. But I think that is an interesting possibility. Then the question is, who would nominate him, do you think? Would it be the parties of the left, do you think? Or do you think had he become a figure that might be more readily associated with the likes of Fianna Fáil, do you think?
I do think Fianna Fáil are a possibility. He was quite pally with Jim Mitchell back in the day. They were both from Ballyfermot, and they were both kind of working class boys made good. I don't know, and I don't know if he's interested. But let's see him deny it. But the other story, let's just want to tell you one other story. So back round about just after COVID started, all my events were cancelled. I'd left full-time broadcasting. So I wrote a syllabus for communications media training. And I was doing it and it was going well, and it was masterclass and media masterclass and so on. And Ken Sweeney rang me up. And he rang me up to say, what advice do you give to people about going on programmes like Liveline? Because Ken wrote for The Sun and he was a tabloid journalist looking for a good headline. And so basically, I said, actually, Ken, I do advise people not to go on programmes like Liveline or any caller programme, because the whole production ethos is black hat, white hat, all drama is conflict, and it'll be all heat and no light. And so basically he went to Joe. And Joe put it then, hit back at me and said that people should ask for a refund of the expense of $1,500 that they were paying for the course, simply because this was the most popular radio programme and avoiding it was a disaster. To which I hit back, there was front page story, and so I hit back the next day saying, well, if you wanted to explain something very difficult like a 500 grand salary a year, I don't think you should go on Liveline, because you're not going to get the kind of thoughtful reflection and analysis that you get, which was a dig at his. So anyway, the third day of the front page, there's no show like a Joe and Ivan show insofar as he had a knockdown track. He got 3 days out of it. And yesterday I got a text. I was tied up all day. Two missed calls and a text from Ken Sweeney. Did I have any comment to make about Joe? I said I'd reserve it for the podcast. But the point about it is that Joe, he actually was very offended by some of the things I had to say. And you know me, I'll always double down in a row. So it was actually quite amusing as far as I was concerned, because there's no such thing as bad publicity.
But I think in fairness, that emphasises that I think Joe very much believes that Liveline is a public service programme. This is public service broadcasting.
No, absolutely. And the truth of it is, look, it is, let's call it what it is. It's a whinge fest. And it's deliberately baiting people whose opinion would not, other than social media, get any traction. They have no mandate, and they just have a grievance politics. So, I mean, like, you can't expect calm, rational discussion on something when actually the whole thing is to incite a row.
I suspect that Katie Hannon is the person who has the most experience as a stand-in. And I think Katie's a very, very good listener, which I think is a very important point when you're actually interviewing people like that. I suppose, what she'll have to do to sort of match what Joe did, and it'll be a very tough act to follow, is to have that little bit of mischievousness to sort of incite, to provoke, to prod that little bit more, to get things going, which is sort of the nature. But I suppose it's another issue, another problem for RTE, in that, do certain things go on forever? Or can they go on forever? Do they need to be changed? In just the same way as the Late Late Show has had to be changed. And yet, despite the best efforts of Patrick Keelty, the numbers don't seem to be anything like what they used to be or what they wanted to be. And it is interesting. I think we may be having another RTE discussion sometime in the near future, because Kevin Backhurst is going to have to go into the Oireachtas Media Committee in front of Alan Kelly to explain what happened in relation to this money that was wasted on a computer system, 3.5 million quid written off. And that offence, I suppose, made worse by the fact that Kevin Backhurst only learnt about it a couple of months ago in advance of having, when it was a request from Patrick O'Donovan, the media minister, for more information about what was going on in various state agencies. And I suppose this is going to be questions that maybe Adrian Lynch is going to have to answer, one of the stars of the whole Ryan Tubridy hearings as well. But I suppose it is interesting. And again, let me say, I haven't spoken to anybody in Noel County management about this, or to Ryan Tubridy or whatever. So I'm making this as my own comment, unprompted by anything else that's going on. But the money involved in the waste in the computer system, the IT system, is far, far more than what was involved in the Ryan Tubridy affair, which outraged the nation and which led to his departure from the station. I wonder, will the politicians, and I wonder indeed will the other media, give this as much attention? Indeed, will RTE give it as much attention in its navel gazing as it did to the Ryan Tubridy situation? What do you think, Ivan?
Well, I actually think it's desperately embarrassing for RTE management and Kevin Backers personally, because what's now transpired in a statement by the new CFO, Mary Hurley, what he's on about. In the 2020 accounts, there was an impairment of 1.87 million for software projects in progress. In 2021, there was 1.18 million of an impairment, 281 grand in 2022, and 204 grand in 2023. All this was in the public domain already. This is not new news. And the fact that RTE doesn't know its right hand from its left hand, but just going back, so obviously there will be a day out in the Oireachtas Committee, more reality TV. But one of the issues that was a classic live line issue that emerged in the last week, which I had a wry smile about. It's amazing how something can be there for years. And then on a quiet Sunday, the slow news day, it erupts. This was the issue of the camogie skorts. So in 2024, the Camogie Association said, no, you've got to wear these skorts. You don't have a choice to wear shorts. Whereas in ladies football, they do wear shorts. So it was a nonsensical position. And it was due to be reviewed at a special at the annual Congress in 2026. Once the brouhaha erupted and the Kilkenny, was it?
Kilkenny and Dublin camogie teams took to the pitch wearing shorts and were threatened with abandonment of the game. And indeed, this coming weekend, there is Cork and Waterford in the Munster final, and the women in both teams are saying they will be wearing shorts.
So now that's become a live line issue. On the 22nd of May, there's going to be a special Congress with a recommendation that all players playing camogie will have a choice. And isn't it interesting when you think about it? Ladies football don't have skorts. Go figure.
Okay, maybe we leave it there and we keep everything else that we want to talk about for the subscriber edition. You go to pathtopowerpodcast.com if you want to get details of how to subscribe, or wherever it is you get your podcast, be it Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or whatever. It's very, very, well, not YouTube, but Spotify or Apple or other podcast providers. It's very easy to sign up to the subscription edition there for a price of just €6 a month. You get, depending on the number of weeks in the month, 4 or 5 extra editions for that bargain price. And we have quite a few things to talk about in it, I think.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I've been totally preoccupied this week with an infrastructure summit whereby 30 of the top players in the ESB, in the transport, everything from roads to Lewis and so on, Irish Water, Ushka Aaron, and various different regulators. Jack Chambers was at it and so on, and David Maloney, the Secretary General of the Department of Public Expenditure. Matt, and I'm going to discuss this in some detail in terms of the pipeline of houses that require electricity and water and planning in situ. You could not make up some of the stories I heard. I'll give you 2 headlines. One is the moratorium on data centres has already cost us 15 billion of FDI investment of people who are here and just decided if we can't get electricity, we're not doing it here in terms of AI. And there's another 15 billion about to leave the country. And secondly, it is simply unbelievable the fact that it previously, infrastructure takes time. It takes about 8 to 10 years from conception to completion. It's now taking 8 years just to deal with planning. And I'm going to give you a chapter and verse on it. It is simply inexplicable, and it's going to have dire consequences for the country in terms of vital services.
Well, we will discuss that and other issues in our special premium edition for subscribers of Path to Power if you would like to join us. So for this edition, from me, Matt Cooper.
From me, Ivan Yates.
Thank you very much for having been with us.